I came to Washington at his suggestion and at the suggestion of my other friends at the Center for Foreign Policy because, as Frank mentioned, I've been writing about this issue. I've been writing about the Muslim Brotherhood for a number of years, and for the past couple of weeks I've been writing about the particular thing that brings us here together today, which is the fact that 5 members of Congress had the temerity to notice that there seems to be an infiltration of Muslim Brotherhood influence in our government. I think I was also asked here because I used to work for the Justice Department, as Frank also mentioned. I was there for about 25 years. At first, I was at the U.S. Marshal Service as a deputy marshal in the Witness Protection Program. And then I was a prosecutor for almost 20 years, as Frank also mentioned. And during that time, I handled or I supervised a number of national security investigations, which generally means terrorism cases, always involving attacks plotted by violent jihadists. I was also involved in a number of investigations that involved national or international organized crime groups, which were often violent in nature. So based on that experience, I guess that was the main reason to come down and talk about this today. But I have to confess that I think the controversy here is baffling. I don't understand why more people in Washington from both parties have not rallied in support of Congresswoman Bachmann, Congressman Gohmert, Franks, Westmoreland, and Rooney. At a time when government policy is being radically harmonized with the agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood, meaning policy has shifted in the direction of avowed enemies of the United States, what ought to shock people is that there's any controversy whatsoever over what I think is really a matter of common sense. The 5 House members are simply asking that the inspectors general in pertinent government agencies conduct internal inquiries and report back to Congress about potential Islamist influences at those agencies. It's essential to understand that Islamic supremacism is not a fringe ideology. And with due respect to the trendy bipartisan diagnosis that has become so popular here in Washington, Islamic supremacism and the extreme forms of behavior that it inspires are not a psychiatric problem. And Islamic supremacism is the dynamic ideology of the Middle East at this moment in history. There have been times when it has been dormant and when its worst tendencies have been cabined or suppressed by law, by cultural pressures, or by force. But at this historic moment, Islamic supremacism is once again in its ascendancy. That's a big problem for us. Islamic supremacists mean us grave harm. We are understandably preoccupied by the fact that violent jihadists are taking aim at our lives. But we should not let the immediacy and horror of that threat obscure the fact that the Islamist movement is taking aim at our way of life. The movement's intellectual leader is the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is not a largely secular umbrella organization. It is not moderate. It is the vanguard of a ground-up, revolutionary, ideological mass movement. It is sophisticated, patient, and determined. It has spent almost 90 years building its reserves and biding its time. Islamists not only tell us that they intend to destroy us, they tell us straight out how they intend to do it, not only by intimidating constant potential violence, but by sabotage. Their word, again, not mine. They will, they say, destroy us from within. They intend to insinuate themselves into our major institutions, including the policy bodies within our government. They intend to compromise us from inside as well as from outside. Where I come from, when serious, competent, threatening people tell you what they're going to do to you and how they're going to do it, that is not something to be ignored. It's something we need to take very seriously. The main way I think that we should take it seriously when it comes to our government is to police our agencies so that they are not penetrated by pernicious influences. That is what these 5 members of Congress have tried to do. What is shocking and demoralizing, if you ask me, and what ought to outrage the American people, is that the 5 of them seem to be standing alone. To be clear, the 5 members have not made accusations of criminal wrongdoing. The critics who say they are relying on guilt by association are absurdly mixing apples and oranges. With that as background, and I appreciate you bearing with me for that long background, let me speak to the specific circumstances of Huma Abedin, the Deputy Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Clinton. It's worth stressing that the 5 members of Congress sent 5 different letters asking inspectors general at 5 different agencies to conduct internal investigations and report back to Congress. Ms. Abedin was far from the only government official whose name was raised, but she has gotten the most attention. For our purposes today, that's fine because her situation dramatically shows, I think, how badly out of kilter things have become. We've heard all the caterwauling about Islamophobia and, naturally, my personal favorite, McCarthyism. 2 things about that. First, Islamophobia is a term that was manufactured by the Muslim Brotherhood precisely for the purpose of browbeating people into silence about the activities and threat posed by Islamic supremacism. Today, there is no worse sin than to be called a bigot, even if the charge is utterly empty. It's intimidating. It's intended to paralyze people into silence when it is their duty to speak up. And it works. That's why 13 Americans, some of our best and bravest, were killed in a jihadist atrocity in Fort Hood. It's also why the government would rather dismiss Fort Hood as a case of workplace violence than deal with the ideology that caused it. Duty is calling us now, and duty has to be done, even if the grievance industry grieves in overdrive. As for McCarthyism, the truth is that all the demagoguery here has been on the other side. Contrary to the claims that 5 members of Congress have raised, as Senator McCain put it, unspecified and unsubstantiated concerns, they've actually posited some very disturbing factual matters that are quite specific and quite substantial. Rather than address those factual matters, matters that include connections not only to Muslim Brotherhood luminaries, but to an al-Qaeda financier, the response of the Obama administration, congressional Democrats, and their echo chamber in the Republican establishment has been to attack and smear the messengers. Having now spent a good deal of time weighing the competing claims, I'm compelled to say that when it comes to Ms. Abedin's background, the 5 House members have actually understated the case. So to summarize, Ms. Abedin had a very lengthy affiliation with an institute founded by a top figure at the nexus between Saudi terror funding, Brotherhood ideology, and al-Qaeda's jihad against the United States. Even if the only pertinent information we had was this personal tie to Nassif, that would be extraordinarily disturbing. But as the 5 House members have pointed out, there's much more. Interestingly, about a year ago, a year before he took to the floor of the United States Senate to attack his House colleagues for raising questions about Ms. Abedin and others, Senator John McCain gave an interview to Der Spiegel in which he pronounced himself unalterably opposed to any role for the Muslim Brotherhood in post-Mubarak Egypt. When the magazine asked Senator McCain what his main objection was to the Brotherhood, he said it's the Brotherhood's promotion of Sharia, which he observed, and this is a quote, is anti-democratic, at least as far as women are concerned. It is also true that presidents and cabinet officials get to consult and seek assistance from pretty much whoever they want. The old adage that elections have consequences is apt here. Cabinet nominations and confirmations have consequences too. If you don't want people with disturbing connections to deeply anti-American organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood to have influence on government officials, then the point is to avoid electing and confirming politicians who are going to put such people in those positions. The relationship between al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood is very interesting. One of the items, I guess, of conventional wisdom that seems to be being sown here is that one of the things that makes the Brotherhood moderate is that they're less wild and crazy than Al Qaeda, who wants to just kill everybody and impose Sharia on the fast track. The interesting thing is they have a very tetchy sort of relationship. The Brotherhood has a good thing going here in the United States. The nonviolent jihad is working quite well for them. I think they've made a calculation that jihadist attacks in the United States are to be avoided because they're doing perfectly well without them. They don't mind the atmosphere of intimidation that results from terrorism attacks, but they realize that when there are terrorist attacks in our country, there's going to be a significant blowback, and that will affect their operations in a negative way. On the other hand, when you're talking about American armed forces or other American presence operating inside Islamic countries, when Al Qaeda attacks Americans in Islamic countries, the Muslim Brotherhood fully supports them. And in fact, the Muslim Brotherhood lauded bin Laden many times. The things that were said about bin Laden by the Brotherhood in Arabic were quite different from some of the things we heard in English. So it's an interesting connection between the two. So we prove that we have this very influential jurist who uses these commands that are threaded through the Quran and gets his followers to commit acts of terrorism. And for that, the Clinton Justice Department brought us down to Washington and gave us, what a Prosecutor of the Year award or whatever it was. And I don't mean to belittle it. We were very honored to go down and get it. Flash forward 15 years later. People who suggest that there are commands to violence in the Quran and they are the fuel that ends up in violent extremism are now called Islamophobes. So what we used to call evidence is now basically a hate crime. And if they get their way and the First Amendment cutbacks that the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation would like to see somehow find their way into our law, it will be much harder not only to prosecute terrorism cases, but even to talk about them. Look, I was very critical of the Bush administration when I think that they bent over backwards and turned a blind eye to things that they shouldn't have turned the blind eye to. I think the Obama administration's made it worse, but they hardly invented the problem. And I don't know what to say about this except that I thought I was clear, that I thought this was a real bipartisan failing. As I said before, Islamophobia is a fabrication by the Muslim Brotherhood. It's a strategy. I mean, this is a label that they've come up with themselves, and like many of their strategies, it's quite clever, and it has worked. It backs people up who are afraid or intimidated by being subjected to that kind of smear. I don't know what to advise people other than you just sort of have to tune that out and not care about it. I don't care about it, so I have trouble identifying with people who do. But I understand the problem. I just think it's a mistake to think that you need to get into a rational argument with people who are moving a movement, not actually trying to have a good faith give and take with you.